Today I'm sharing a layout that documents the final night of our trip in August of 2023. I'm using the beautiful gallery 6x6 paper collection from Stampin Up and focusing on soft layering, simple details, and a clean layout design. I used this collection in last week's process video and really enjoyed working with it. If layering ever feels a bit tricky or your pages end up looking too full, I hope these tips will help. So let's get started. This collection is all about large gallery style prints. I only pulled out 2 of each design, but there are 4 sheets of each in the pack. Well, the A-sides are beautiful, and honestly, I still say they could be framed. So for today's page, I am concentrating on the B-sides. So these are the photos I am documenting today. I have a variety of sizes, 3 slightly smaller than 3x4, a 4x5.5 portrait, and 1 4x5 3/4 landscape. The story is really about the hotel and our room, which I'll share with you a little bit later on in the process. But if you take a look at the photos, I think this collection complements them so well. There's the soft blues from the walls, lots of warm wood tones, and a mix of white and cream throughout. So let me clean up here. I'll grab 2 pieces of very vanilla cardstock for the base of my layout, and together we'll pick out the pattern papers that will work perfectly with these photos. And I'm using the lighter side of the 2-tone cardstock. I'm going to tack the paper down to my desk to keep things from slipping. I'm sure that you've heard, but Stampin Up now carries 2-tone cardstock in all of the colors. It's basically double the options in one pack. So by girl math, that's like getting twice the paper, right? I'm starting with this sketch from Susie Plantamara, and I'm sure I totally said that wrong. I chose it because I liked the number of photo spots and the overall photo placement. On the left side, there's a 5x7 landscape photo, but of course, mine is quite a bit smaller. And instead of a 4x4 photo next to it, I'm using a 3x4. The sketch shows a 4x6 portrait photo on the far right, followed by some paper strips, and then 2 3x4 landscape photos stacked next to it, with another strip beside them. The original sketch, the paper strips run through the center of the layout. I'm taking that idea and shifting the strips behind the photos and towards the edges instead. So because I'm working with 6x6 papers, I'll need to bring in some cardstock to run down the center of the layout to mount the photos on. Before I choose the color for the cardstock, let's look at the DSP and pick out the background papers first. I'm envisioning the first strip running about 1/2 inch from the edge of the base. I want a pattern I can match at the seams or something busier that will hide that break. I really like this bold floral. It has minimal color, so it's not too distracting, and placing it on either side gives the layout nice balance. Next, I'm looking for a blue pattern. There's this one. Oh, but I think I like this one better. It has a subtle design and it reminds me of the walls in our hotel room. Oh, see, look at that. Perfect. Let's get those sketches out of the way here. We don't need that right now. Then there's this tan and coral damask pattern. It totally reminds me of old wallpaper and brings in that lovely calypso coral color. For the last strip, I'm thinking of this beige plaster-like print. I've already cut into this one, but that's okay. I'll just use smaller pieces. To keep the layering looking clean, I'm sticking with just 2 or 3 main colors pulled from the paper collection. I have a few scraps of this wood tone pattern, and to me, it has that worn antique look, so I'd like to use it where I can. This strip approach really helps stretch those smaller paper sizes. And by tucking them behind the cardstock, it gives the illusion that they're longer than they are. Now for the cardstock choice. Looking at the picture here, yes, it is of the bathroom. You can see dark blue molding that runs throughout the entire room. I always say navy is a great neutral, and I've got Night of Navy and Secret Sea here. Both would work beautifully. It's just a matter of which one looks the best to me. Let me swap these photos here around a bit. Yep, I'm going to go with the Secret Sea cardstock. I'm happy with that choice and ready to commit. So off camera, I'll trim everything down and then come back with measurements and next steps. I'm starting with the Secret Sea cardstock. These both measure 9.5 by 6.5 inches. And I'm placing them roughly centered so they meet in the middle, creating the look of one continuous 12 by 24 layout. For the floral pattern, I've cut 2 pieces in half. I'll need to trim one sheet on each side down a bit, but for now, I'll leave them at 6 inches tall. This gives me 4 pieces measuring 3 by 6, and I'll tuck them beside the cardstock here, lining up the floral pattern on the outer edges. For the blue paper, I used 1 sheet and cut it into 4 equal pieces, and I'm tucking those at the top and the bottom of the cardstock, again on each side. The beige pattern had already been cut into. I was still able to cut it into 4 equal pieces. Each one measures 2.5 by 3. I'm repeating the same process here. I'm just roughly placing them for now, and I'll fine-tune things a little bit later. Lastly, I have the beige and coral damask pattern. These pieces are all 1 3/4 inches wide, but the lengths vary because I was trying to save part of the image from the A side, and I'll show you what I mean later on in the process. Here's a layering tip I find really helps keep things looking clean but still interesting. Start with a visual anchor, something a bit larger like a photo mat or a block of cardstock. That will ground your layout. Let's bring the photos back in. I've got the 2 larger sized ones. This first one is the view from our room looking out into the garden. The portrait photo shows what you see as you walk through the door into our room. Next, I'll stack the smaller photos, just a few more shots from around the room, one above the other. And finally, the last photo, and that's of the front door of the inn. Back to that tip. Once you have your anchor in place, build out from there by tucking in smaller pieces at soft angles or with a bit of offset. That's what I'm doing here. I'm overlapping the layers a little to add some extra depth and interest. Looking at it now, I think there's too much blue concentrated in one area. I'm going to swap the 2 photos to break that up. Let's see. Move this one here. Yeah, that's much better. In the sketch, there's a strip running across the lower section of the layout with a smaller narrow strip layered on top of that. That sort of acts like a shelf for the photos to rest on. To bring in more of the coral color, I have these 2 strips of Calypso Coral cardstock. These are 1.5 inches tall. One is a full 12 inches and the other one, well, it's shorter. Anyway, I could use the true side, that darker side, or I could go with the lighter side. For a softer look, I'm going with the light side. And I'll just get that tucked into place here. To represent the smaller strip from the sketch, I found these pieces of off-white fabric and a bit of mesh-like material. I had this in a page kit from years ago and I thought, why not? I'm thinking I could incorporate both somehow. maybe the mesh piece underneath and that scallop fabric layered on top. I'm not sure what I originally planned with this fabric. There's even a bit of inking on the edges. Anyway, I thought that this would be a great way to tie in the bedding and the curtains from our suite. Let's see here. It's not quite long enough to run across the full length of the coral cardstock strip. And I do want to ruffle it up a little bit to echo the look of the linens. I think I can make it work. Now, before I get too far into this process, I want to define the edges of the pattern papers using Secret Sea ink. I'm using a sponge for this step. I find I have better control with it and can be more precise about where the ink goes. This is a great little tip when layering. Try inking or lightly distressing the edges of your papers. It adds some soft dimension and helps each piece stand out without adding too much contrast. It's a subtle way to make everything feel more finished. I am making really good progress on this holiday to Atlantic Canada. We approached this trip a little differently than any other. We didn't pre-plan or pre-book much at all. We flew into Prince Edward Island and had just booked the hotel for the first 2 nights in Charlottetown. After that, we decided each morning where we were going next and booked our rooms, tours, or excursions for that day. Or maybe like a day ahead if we needed to. It was a fun way to travel. We had a wish list of things we wanted to do and just rolled with it. So for our last night in New Brunswick, we planned to be in Sackville. That's where my oldest son, Aiden, was attending school. We wanted to see him again before flying home. There's only 3 hotels in Sackville. For that night, we chose the Marshlands Inn. To my surprise, the honeymoon suite was available. It had a queen-size bed and a twin, so it suited our needs perfectly. I wasn't entirely sure why it was called the honeymoon suite or if that name had anything to do with the bed setup, but we didn't question it and I went ahead and booked it. The building itself was so charming, filled with antique furniture and ornate details, and the walls were lined with framed photos from famous people who stayed at the inn over the years. Princess Elizabeth II in 1984. There was also pictures of senators, premiers, artists, and other noble guests. The history of the place really added to the charm. The parlor has a portrait of Ruth Crane Cogswell, the original owner, and it turns out the house dates back to 1854. And it really did feel like stepping into another time. The sketch shows the title in the lower right, but I prefer mine on the left side of the layout. It just feels more balanced to me there, and I have this area that I think will be the perfect spot. For the title, I'm using the party alphabet dies to spell out the word memory. It's a little tight in the space I've got, but if I overlap the letters just slightly, I can make it fit perfectly. I'm cutting the layers from basic beige cardstock, and I'm using the true side, so the darker side. For the rest of the title, I'm combining the alphabet a la mode dies and the mini alphabet dies. I'm starting with the word room, and I'll cut that from Calypso Coral cardstock. That'll bring in a nice pop of that coral up at the top of the layout and help tie everything in together. Next, I'm using this wood effect paper to cut the words with a. The full title will read Room with a Memory. I thought it was a fitting choice, not just because of the long history of the building, but for another reason, and I'll get to that in a bit. Before I attach everything, I want to add a little extra detail to the word memory. I'm using this stamp from the beautiful motif set. To pick up a stamp this size and to make sure it's straight, I like to use the block to pick it up directly. A quick tip, try to use a block that's close to the size of the stamp. It gives you more control and helps avoid getting ink on the edges, which can sometimes end up on your projects where you don't want it. I'm stamping on a foam mat and a very well-used scrap copy paper, placing that on top. I considered using second generation stamping instead of full strength. That's when you stamp off and then stamp onto your project. Always test your stamp first. But Stampin' Up ink does dry back a little, so I wasn't too worried about it being too dark. I'm stamping one side of the M, then the next. I want the pattern to run in the same direction across each letter, and I'm trying not to overlap the image through the middle. I'll continue stamping across all of the letters in memory. So back to the photos. The honeymoon suite, like I said, I booked it mostly because it had a queen bed and a twin. The room itself was lovely. Antique furniture, a tray ceiling, and so much historic character. Until we arrived and realized the bathroom had no door. I guess that's why it's called the honeymoon suite. Though honestly, even if it was just my husband and I'd still prefer a bathroom door. There were a few other surprises too, like the vintage porcelain dolls thoughtfully placed around the room. And now, if you are into dolls, I'm sure you would have found them charming. For us, they felt a little too realistic. We ended up turning them to face the wall so we wouldn't feel like we were being watched while we slept. And that's the second reason behind the title. It was definitely a memory like no other. I'm using the leftover ink from the sponge to add some soft detail to each letter. I gently fold, not crease, the letters to help get into those little nooks and crannies. Even if you get a slight fold in it, once they're attached to the layout, you won't notice. I have these two frames, and if you caught my last video using this suite, you might remember them. I used the die that comes as part of the full suite. I went through some of the pieces in more detail in that video, and I'll link that at the end of this one in case you missed it. The frame cuts 3 frames, the inner and an inner rectangle. For this layout, I'm using the leftover frames as placeholders for my embellishment clusters. I'm tucking the larger one here on the right. This could even work as a journaling spot. I could place that inside the frame. And I'll place the smaller one over on the far left. That also helps cover the seam in that floral paper and ties in nicely with the title letters. I did some stash diving and pulled out these knit flowers. I have had them forever, but they're perfect for this layout. They remind me of like the flower doilies Grandma used to knit or crochet. They are a little bulky, but since this trip is getting its own album, I'm not too worried. I only have 2. By placing them in opposite corners, draws the eye across the page and helps with balance. I picked up the Something for Everything ephemera pack from Stampin' Up a while ago with this trip in mind. There's lighthouses, boats, fish, and of course these little suitcases. I don't want to incorporate that shy shamrock color into the design, but I'm thinking if I just cut that part off, let's see, is there anything else I can use in here? The ephemera came on carrier sheets that you can easily remove the pieces from. And I popped them all out and I'm storing everything in this little bag for now. I am considering this wreath. It has coral berries on it, and our room did have a lot of wreaths or like floral swags throughout. I'll leave this here on the layout for now and see how I feel about it. To add to the clusters, I'm using the A side from that coral and beige damask pattern. Now I have cut out this single flower and I'll cut out the group of 2 flowers off camera. I wasn't thinking when I fussy cut out the first one, and I didn't leave any of the leaves on it. So this time I'm making sure to keep those intact. Off camera, I removed the top suitcase from the stack and I trimmed down the white edges a little more. As for that wreath, I don't think it quite matches the feel of this layout, so I'll save that for another project. I'll place the suitcases here for now, and I'm tucking the group of 2 paper flowers behind this crochet flower to build a larger cluster up here in the upper right. I like that. I'll use the single flower right here above the title. The word room in the title was fading in the background, so I wanted to add more interest to the letters. I used the Elements of Text stamp, this one here with the scripty font, and I stamped onto them using the coordinating Calypso Coral ink. To me, it adds a nice old world charm, but they still felt a little flat. To help them stand out, I die cut 3 extra sets of letters. 2 in white, which I layered behind the coral ones for dimension, and 1 in Secret Seed cardstock. I'm offsetting that layer slightly to create a shadow, and that I think really makes a difference. I moved the words with A so they run vertically beside memory. I typed and printed my journaling, and I tucked it behind that frame on the right. I'm using the beautiful motif dies to build up the clusters I've started. I can't say this enough. I love this leaf die. This one is a partial cut, parts of the stem and some of the leaves cut out, while others remain attached. It gives you the option to tuck elements or paper underneath for a really neat look to your cards or layouts. What I did was snip off a few of the leaves and the top portion of the cut image. I cut this from Mossy Meadow cardstock. I only cut one of the fern-like sprigs from the lighter side of Calypso Coral cardstock. And I used the same script stamp from the Elements of Text. I stamped onto the leaves just like I did with the word room in the title. I trimmed it into 3 pieces to tuck into the cluster. Adds just a subtle pop of that coral without overwhelming those clusters. Let's move the suitcases down to the bottom of this photo here. I'll use them to cover the area where the fabric ruffles are missing, kind of tricking your eye into thinking it runs all the way across under the bottom of the pictures. The tags to go dies include both key shapes and key tags. One of them is this old-fashioned key. How perfect is that? There's a lot of great tag options in this set also, but I chose this one because of the shape and size. It reminded me of that vintage hotel key tag. I was able to print Honeymoon Suite on it with my printer. I used Balmy Blue cardstock for the tag to repeat the color from the suitcase on the ephemera piece. I also cut 2 keys and another smaller tag from copper cardstock. This is the die that I used here for that smaller tag, and I thought it would make a cute little add-on with the keys. I printed on this tag the same way I printed onto like journaling cards or pre-cut journal boxes, and I did demo that in my last video. To attach the keys, I snipped a slit at the top to thread them through the hole in the tag. The seam will be hidden in the back, and with some strategic gluing, no one will ever know that it was cut. The whole piece will go in this cluster on the left, covering where the fabric ruffles end on that side. To repeat the copper color in the other clusters, I die cut a flourish from the Beautiful Motifs dies. Since this is also a partial cut die, I had to do some careful surgery to remove it fully from the paper. I was able to salvage 2 pieces, and I'll tuck one in this cluster here and the other at the top. The suitcase looked a little funny after I removed the top one. So to cover up that spot, I fussy cut a little flower from this paper here. To repeat the blue color into this area, I cut another flourish. Again, this is a partial cut, and I trimmed it free from the background. Since I was on a roll, I went ahead and cut out one from copper too, and I'll place that here for now. Yeah, I'm really happy with how that looks. The top cluster could use blue as well. So I turned to my Cricut and cut out this doll image I found in Design Space. I used balmy blue ink and a blending brush to soften and age the look of her dress and bow. I also traced along the cut lines with Stampin' Up's new journaling pen, and I gave her some eyes. I think this is a perfect little nod to the decor in our room. To finish off, I found a couple of word stickers in my stash. One says "The Story," and the other says "Let's travel together and make memories." To include the date on the layout, I used the date stamp from the Tags to Go stamp set. I stamped it onto basic beige cardstock with black ink. And to balance out the design, I cut one more small flower to tuck beside the word room in the title. Here's one more layering idea. Up one element up. Using foam dimensionals or layers of cardstock can really help make elements stand out. Lastly, I'm using the pressed flower motifs to add a final touch of detail around the page. And I'll place them in groups of 3, arranging in a triangle formation around each cluster. The sketch I started with for this layout ended up being more of a jumping off point. I kept the photo placement intact, and the idea of using strips of paper like I did definitely came from the sketch. You probably noticed I ditched the mesh I was planning on using. Just didn't quite feel right for this layout. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found some of the tips useful. I'd love it if you gave this video a thumbs up. That small gesture really helps me out here on YouTube. And if you've just found me, or you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? I'd love to have you as part of my growing community, and I'm working towards reaching 1,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate your support with that. Here's a close-up of the finished layout. Can you see the layers in that doll? I'm super happy with how this turned out. There's all these little details, the ruffled fabric, all the layers in the clusters, and those little knit flowers really bring something special to the layout. And I'm so glad that I was finally able to use them. I've got another page done for my East Coast album. And while the porcelain dolls were giving off a little too much personality and the bathroom was missing a rather important feature, a door, it was definitely a memorable stay, and I love how this layout came together. Thanks again for being here. Let's keep telling our stories one page at a time. If you want to continue following along with my summer of sketches, here's a playlist for you to enjoy. And if you missed last week's video, you can find that one right here on the right. I'll see you in the next one.